Julian Perry never imagined that helping a stranger in distress would cost him his job at Phoenix Manufacturing. As the night janitor at the sprawling industrial complex in Millbrook, he'd always kept his head down, focused on providing stability for his young daughter. But when he witnessed a well-dressed woman being harassed in the parking garage after hours, his conscience wouldn't let him walk away. What happened next shocked everyone. Within minutes of stepping in to help, Julian found himself escorted off the property, fired for inappropriate involvement in company affairs. His supervisor made it clear, janitors stay in their lane, period. But the woman he'd helped wasn't just any visitor to Phoenix Manufacturing. She was Hazel Price, and she had the power to change everything. 20-4 hours later, the impossible happened. The company had a new owner, and Julian's world was about to transform in ways he never could have imagined. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights in Phoenix Manufacturing's underground parking garage flickered with their usual unreliable rhythm as Julian Perry made his final rounds of the night shift. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and the sprawling industrial complex in Millbrook was nearly empty except for the skeleton crew of security guards and maintenance workers who kept the facility running around the clock. Julian had been pushing his janitorial cart through these same corridors for 3 years, invisible to the executives and engineers who filled the building during daylight hours. He preferred it that way. The night shift paid a premium, the health benefits were comprehensive, and most importantly, it allowed him to be home when his 7-year-old daughter Emma woke up each morning. The arrangement had given their small family the stability they desperately needed after years of uncertainty. As he descended the concrete ramp toward the executive parking level, Julian heard raised voices echoing off the garage walls. His first instinct was to turn around. Phoenix Manufacturing had strict policies about employees staying within their designated work areas, and the executive parking was definitely off-limits to janitorial staff. But something in the tone of the voices made him pause. One voice was aggressive, demanding. The other was clearly distressed. "I already told you, I'm not interested," a woman's voice said firmly, though Julian could detect the underlying tremor of fear. "Please leave me alone." "Come on, don't be like that," a man's voice responded, slurred with alcohol. "I saw you in the boardroom today. You were impressed with my presentation. Why don't we continue the conversation somewhere more private?" Julian recognized the man's voice. Derek Hawthorne, Phoenix Manufacturing's head of sales, known throughout the company for his aggressive tactics and inflated ego. What Julian didn't recognize was the woman's voice, though her polished accent suggested she was someone important, likely one of the visiting executives who had been touring the facility that week. Peering around the corner of a concrete pillar, Julian could see the scene unfolding near the elevator bank. A woman in an expensive navy blue suit was pressed against her car, a sleek black sedan with out-of-state plates. Hawthorne stood uncomfortably close, one hand braced against the car door, effectively trapping her. The woman clutched her briefcase and pursed tightly, her knuckles white with tension. "Mr. Hawthorne, I need to leave now," she said, attempting to sidestep him. "My flight departs early tomorrow morning." "That's perfect," Hawthorne leered, moving to block her path again. "Gives us all night to get better acquainted. I know some great places in town, very discreet." The woman's composure was beginning to crack. "I'm asking you politely to step away from my car." "Or what?" Hawthorne laughed, emboldened by what he perceived as her vulnerability. "You'll report me to who?" "This is my territory, sweetheart. I've got friends in all the right places." Julian felt his stomach clench with a familiar mixture of anger and protective instinct. The scene reminded him too vividly of situations he'd witnessed before, moments when someone with power used it to intimidate someone they perceived as helpless. Every fiber of his being told him to intervene, but his practical mind reminded him of the consequences. Phoenix Manufacturing's employee handbook was crystal clear about unauthorized interaction with executives and visitors. Interfering could cost him his job, and losing this position would be catastrophic for Emma and him. But as Hawthorne moved even closer to the woman, Julian heard her breath catch in what sounded like the beginning of panic. The sound shattered his internal debate. "Excuse me," Julian called out, pushing his cart into view as he approached them. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need to check the emergency exits on this level before I can finish my shift." Both Hawthorne and the woman turned toward him in surprise. Hawthorne's expression immediately shifted to irritation, while the woman's eyes showed a flicker of desperate hope. "This is a private conversation," Hawthorne snapped. "Move along, janitor." "I understand, sir," Julian replied respectfully, continuing to move closer with his cart. "But safety regulations require me to test all the emergency lighting and exit signs. It'll just take a few minutes." The woman seized the opportunity Julian had created. "Actually, Mr. Hawthorne, I really do need to leave now. Perhaps we can continue our discussion during business hours tomorrow." "We're not finished here," Hawthorne said, his voice taking on a threatening edge. He turned to Julian with undisguised hostility. "I said move along. This doesn't concern you." Julian could feel the tension escalating dangerously. He made a split-second decision that would change everything. "Ma'am, if you're ready to leave, I'd be happy to escort you to the exit. Sometimes the garage lighting sensors don't activate properly at night, and it can be dangerous walking alone in the dark areas." The woman immediately understood the lifeline he was offering. "Yes, thank you. That would be very helpful." Hawthorne's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. "Are you serious right now? Do you have any idea who I am? Who you're interfering with?" "I'm just doing my job, sir," Julian replied calmly, though his heart was racing. "Ensuring visitor safety is part of our protocol. Your job is mopping floors and emptying trash cans." Hawthorne exploded. "Your job is staying invisible and keeping your mouth shut." The woman had managed to unlock her car and was quickly placing her belongings inside. Julian positioned himself between her and Hawthorne, his janitorial cart serving as a makeshift barrier. "I apologize if I've caused any confusion," Julian said diplomatically. "I was simply following standard safety procedures." As the woman started her car, Hawthorne's fury reached a boiling point. "You have no idea what you've just done," he hissed at Julian. "No idea who you're messing with." The woman rolled down her window as she prepared to leave. "Thank you," she said quietly, her eyes meeting Julian's with genuine gratitude. "I won't forget this." As her taillights disappeared up the garage ramp, Hawthorne turned his full attention to Julian. "You just made the biggest mistake of your pathetic life," he snarled. "I'm going to make sure you never work in this town again." Julian watched him storm toward the elevator, already pulling out his phone to make calls. The fluorescent lights continued their erratic flickering overhead, casting shifting shadows across the concrete walls. In the sudden silence of the garage, Julian could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. He knew with absolute certainty that he had just sacrificed his job, and potentially his family's financial security, for a woman whose name he didn't even know. But as he thought about the fear in her eyes and the relief on her face when she'd been able to escape safely, he couldn't bring himself to regret his decision. What Julian didn't know was that the woman he'd helped was about to repay his kindness in ways he could never have imagined. The morning sun filtered through the small windows of Julian's modest apartment on Maple Street, creating geometric patterns of light across the worn hardwood floors. He sat at their tiny kitchen table, mechanically stirring his coffee while staring at the termination letter that had been delivered by courier at 6 a.m. sharp. The Phoenix Manufacturing letterhead seemed to mock him with its bold corporate logo and official seal. "Effective immediately," Your employment with Phoenix Manufacturing has been terminated due to violation of company policy regarding unauthorized interaction with executives and visitors. The letter read in cold, impersonal language. Your final paycheck and accrued benefits will be processed within 2 business days. Please return all company property, including your security badge and uniform, to Human Resources by end of business today. The letter was signed by Margaret Collins, Director of Human Resources, but Julian knew the real power behind his dismissal was Derek Hawthorne. True to his threat from the previous night, Hawthorne had wasted no time in exercising his influence to have Julian removed from the company. "Daddy, why aren't you getting ready for bed?" Emma's sleepy voice came from the doorway as she shuffled into the kitchen, her favorite stuffed elephant tucked under one arm. Her honey-colored hair was tousled from sleep, and she wore the rainbow-striped pajamas that her grandmother had sent for her last birthday. Julian quickly folded the termination letter and slipped it into his pocket, forcing a smile for his daughter's benefit. "Good morning, sunshine. I don't have to work today, so I thought I'd make you breakfast instead." Emma's face lit up with excitement. "Really? Can we make the pancakes with the faces?" "Absolutely," Julian said, grateful for the distraction from his racing thoughts. "Why don't you go brush your teeth while I get everything ready?" As Emma scampered back down the hallway, Julian surveyed their small kitchen with new eyes. The refrigerator was covered with Emma's artwork, drawings of rainbows, flowers, and stick figures labeled "Me" and "Daddy." The pantry was well stocked thanks to his careful budgeting, but he knew their savings account contained exactly $1,247, barely enough to cover next month's rent, let alone the ongoing expenses of raising a 7-year-old. Preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd lost his job for doing exactly what he'd always taught Emma to do: help others in need, stand up for what's right, and never turn away from someone who's scared or hurt. How could he explained to her that sometimes doing the right thing came with a price that seemed impossibly high? Julian had taken the night shift at Phoenix Manufacturing, specifically because it allowed him to maintain a normal schedule with Emma. He could take her to school each morning, be there when she returned in the afternoon, help with homework, share dinner together, and read bedtime stories before heading to work at 10 p.m. Mrs. Patterson, their elderly neighbor, would check on Emma periodically throughout the night, but Emma slept soundly and never felt abandoned or neglected. The arrangement had been perfect for their needs, but Julian knew that finding another job with similar hours and benefits would be nearly impossible, especially with Hawthorne likely spreading word about his unreliable and insubordinate behavior to other companies in the area. "I'm ready for pancakes," Emma announced, bouncing back into the kitchen with her teeth freshly brushed and her hair attempting to be smoothed down. "Can mine have a smiley face with blueberry eyes?" "Of course," Julian said, pulling ingredients from the cabinets. As he measured flour and cracked eggs, Emma climbed onto her usual stool at the counter, chattering about her plans for school that day. "Mrs. Rodriguez says we're going to start learning about community helpers this week," Emma said, swinging her legs. "She wants us to draw pictures of people who help make our neighborhood better. I'm going to draw you." Julian's throat tightened with emotion. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. What are you going to draw me doing?" "Helping people, of course," Emma replied matter-of-factly. "Like when you helped Mrs. Patterson carry her groceries up the stairs when her back was hurting. Or when you fixed the Martinez family's fence after the storm. You're always helping people, Daddy." The simple truth of her observation hit Julian like a physical blow. Emma saw him as a helper, a protector, someone who made their community better. She had no idea that this fundamental aspect of his character, the very thing she admired most about him, had just cost them their financial security. As he poured batter into the heated pan, creating the familiar Mickey Mouse shape that never failed to delight Emma, Julian's mind wandered back to the previous night's encounter. He could still see the fear in the woman's eyes, still hear the tremor in her voice as she'd tried to maintain her composure while being cornered by Hawthorne. In that moment, her expensive suit and obvious wealth had been irrelevant. She'd been a person in distress, and he'd responded to her humanity rather than her status. But now, in the harsh light of morning, Julian had to confront the practical consequences of his decision. Phoenix Manufacturing had been more than just a job. It had been their lifeline. The health insurance had covered Emma's asthma medications and regular pediatric checkups. The steady income had allowed them to build a small emergency fund and even start saving for Emma's future education. The predictable schedule had given Emma the stability every professional had told him was crucial for her development after losing her mother. "Daddy, the pancake is smoking," Emma pointed out, interrupting his worried thoughts. Julian quickly flipped the pancake, relieved to see that despite his distraction, it had achieved the perfect golden brown color. He used a squeeze bottle filled with batter to add the facial features, creating Emma's requested blueberry eyes and a cheerful smile. "Perfect." Emma clapped her hands as he placed the plate in front of her. "It's the happiest pancake ever." As Julian watched his daughter carefully cut her breakfast into small bites, savoring each piece with the pure joy that only a 7-year-old could muster, he made a silent promise. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever sacrifices he'd have to make, he would find a way to preserve Emma's happiness and security. She deserved to continue believing that the world was a place where good people helped each other, where kindness was rewarded, and where her father could protect her from anything. The phone rang as Emma was finishing her breakfast, and Julian felt his pulse quicken. The caller ID showed Phoenix Manufacturing's main number. "Hello?" Julian answered cautiously. "Mr. Perry? This is Margaret Collins from Human Resources. I need you to come in this morning to complete your exit processing and return company property." "Of course," Julian replied, keeping his voice steady. "What time would be convenient?" "As soon as possible. Say 10 a.m. I'll be there." After hanging up, Julian realized that Emma was watching him with curious eyes. "Who was that, Daddy?" "Just someone from work," Julian said, ruffling her hair affectionately. "I need to go there for a little while after I drop you off at school. Mrs. Patterson will pick you up this afternoon, okay?" "Okay," Emma agreed readily, then paused with a thoughtful expression. "Daddy, are you sad about something?" Julian's heart clenched at her perceptiveness. Even at 7, Emma had an uncanny ability to read his emotions. "Maybe a little bit, sunshine. But you know what makes me feel better? What?" "Remembering how lucky I am to have the most amazing daughter in the whole world." Emma giggled and threw her arms around his neck, sticky with syrup but warm with love. "I love you too, Daddy. And remember, even when things seem scary, everything always works out okay in the end." Her innocent wisdom brought tears to Julian's eyes. If only life were as simple as Emma believed it to be. But perhaps, just perhaps, she might be right about everything working out in the end. That what Julian didn't know was that his act of kindness the night before had set in motion a chain of events that would prove Emma's childlike faith in happy endings to be more prophetic than he could have ever imagined. The Phoenix Manufacturing lobby bustled with its usual mid-morning activity as Julian approached the security desk at exactly 10 a.m. Employees hurried past with coffee cups and manila folders, their conversations a constant hum of corporate urgency. The massive reception area, with its polished marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows, had always made Julian feel small and out of place, but today the sensation was amplified by his circumstances. "I'm here to see Margaret Collins in HR," Julian told the security guard, a middle-aged man named Frank, whom he'd greeted countless times during shift changes. but who now looked at him with uncomfortable recognition. "She's expecting you," Frank said quietly, avoiding eye contact as he handed Julian a visitor's badge. "Elevators are—" "I know where they are," Julian interrupted gently. After 3 years of working in the building, he could navigate its corridors. Blindfolded, the elevator ride to the 3rd floor felt interminable. Julian clutched the small cardboard box containing his company-issued items, the security badge that had granted him access to every floor, his embroidered work shirts with the Phoenix Manufacturing logo, and the small flashlight that had helped him navigate dark corners during his nightly rounds. Such modest items, yet they represented 3 years of steady employment and the foundation of his family's stability. Margaret Collins' office was sterile and impersonal, decorated with motivational posters about teamwork and excellence that felt particularly ironic given the circumstances. Collins herself was a thin, efficient woman in her 50s who had always been polite but distant during Julian's occasional interactions with the HR department. "Please sit down, Mr. Perry," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Her tone was professional but not unkind. "I have your final paperwork ready for signature." Julian set his box of company property on her desk and took the offered seat. Collins slid a manila folder across to him, filled with forms requiring his signature and explanations of his final pay and benefits continuation options. "I want you to know," Collins said carefully, "that this decision didn't originate from my department. The directive came from upper management with specific instructions for immediate termination." Julian nodded, understanding the subtext. Collins was letting him know that she wasn't personally responsible for his firing, that higher powers had demanded his removal. "I understand. May I ask what specific policy I'm alleged to have violated?" Collins consulted her computer screen. Section 4.7 of the Employee Handbook, unauthorized interaction with executives, clients, or visitors outside the scope of assigned duties. Also Section 6.2, failure to follow direct instructions from supervisory personnel. "I see." Julian had memorized those sections the night before, knowing they would be cited. "And who filed the complaint?" "Derek Hawthorne submitted a detailed incident report this morning, describing your inappropriate interference with his business discussions and your insubordinate response when instructed to leave the area." Julian felt a surge of anger at Hawthorne's characterization of events, but he kept his voice level. "I was performing routine safety checks as required by my shift duties. When I encountered what appeared to be a distressed visitor, I offered assistance in accordance with our customer service guidelines." Collins looked genuinely sympathetic. "Mr. Perry, I've reviewed your employment record. 3 years of perfect attendance, no disciplinary actions, consistently positive performance reviews from your supervisors. This situation is ... unfortunate. But not reversible? I'm afraid not. The decision has been made at the highest levels." Julian began signing the various forms, each signature feeling like another nail in the coffin of his family's security. As he worked through the paperwork, Collins continued speaking. "I should mention that Mr. Hawthorne has indicated he'll be providing references to other potential employers regarding your reliability issues. I wanted you to be aware." The implication was clear. Hawthorne wasn't content with simply having Julian fired. He intended to make sure Julian couldn't find comparable employment elsewhere in Millbrook. It was a vindictive move that went far beyond the incident itself, designed to punish Julian for the perceived humiliation of being interrupted during his harassment of the woman in the garage. "I appreciate the warning," Julian said quietly. Finishing the last signature, Collins leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "Mr. Perry, may I speak frankly?" Julian nodded. "I've been in HR for 15 years, and I've seen a lot of situations. What happened last night ... Based on the security camera footage I reviewed, Your actions were those of a decent person trying to help someone who was clearly uncomfortable. Derek Hawthorne has a reputation, and not a good one. Several women have filed informal complaints about his behavior, though none have been willing to pursue formal action. Julian was surprised by her candor. Then why? Because Derek Hawthorne brings in $12 million in annual revenue and has connections throughout the industry, Collins said bluntly. And you're a night janitor with no corporate allies. It's not right, but it's reality. The brutal honesty of her assessment hit Julian harder than any formal reprimand could have. He was expendable in a way that Hawthorne, despite his obvious misconduct, was not. His 3 years of dedicated service, his perfect attendance record, his genuine care for the company and its employees, none of it mattered when weighed against corporate politics and revenue generation. However, Collins continued, I want you to know that if you ever need a reference from me personally, you can count on an honest assessment of your character and work ethic. I have your personal contact information, and I'll keep it confidential. Thank you, Julian said, genuinely touched by her offer. That means more than you know. As Julian stood to leave, Collins made one final comment. For what it's worth, Mr. Perry, I hope that woman you helped appreciates what you sacrificed for her. Walking back through the lobby, Julian reflected on Collins' words. The woman in the garage had seemed genuinely grateful, but she had no idea what his intervention had cost him. She'd driven away to safety while he'd stayed behind to face the consequences alone. It was an unequal trade by any measure, his family's financial security in exchange for a few minutes of her peace of mind. But as Julian pushed through the building's glass doors and stepped into the bright morning sunlight, he realized something important. Given the same situation, he would make the same choice again. Not because it was practical or wise, but because it was right. Emma's innocent faith in helping others wasn't naive idealism. It was the foundation of human decency that made life worth living. The question now was whether decency would be enough to sustain them. Through the challenges ahead, Julian's phone buzzed with a text message as he walked toward his car. The number was unfamiliar, but the message made his heart skip a beat. Mr. Perry, this is the woman you helped last night. I would very much like to speak with you. Are you available to meet this afternoon? HP. Julian stared at the message in disbelief. Somehow, the mysterious woman had gotten his phone number and wanted to meet with him. After losing his job for helping her, he wasn't sure whether this development filled him with hope or dread. Emma's voice echoed in his memory. Everything always works out okay in the end. Perhaps his 7-year-old daughter was wiser than he'd given her credit for. The Cornerstone Cafe sat on a quiet, tree-lined street in downtown Millbrook, the kind of independently owned establishment that survived on loyal locals and excellent coffee rather than corporate marketing. Julian arrived 10 minutes early, choosing a corner table near the windows where he could watch for the woman who had changed his life in the span of a single evening. He'd spent the drive over trying to imagine what she might want to discuss. An apology for the trouble his intervention had caused. A thank you gesture, perhaps a small reward for his help. Or maybe something more concerning. Perhaps she felt guilty about his termination and wanted to offer some form of compensation, which would be both generous and deeply humiliating. At exactly 2 p.m., Julian saw her approach through the cafe's front window. In daylight, without the shadows and tension of the parking garage, she appeared younger than he'd initially thought, probably in her early 30s. With auburn hair pulled back in a sophisticated bun and sharp green eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. She wore a charcoal gray business suit that was clearly expensive but understated, and she moved with the confident stride of someone accustomed to being in control of situations. She spotted Julian immediately and approached his table with a warm smile that transformed her serious features. Mr. Perry? I'm Hazel Price. Thank you so much for agreeing to meet with me. Please, call me Julian, he said, standing to shake her offered hand, "and I should be the one thanking you. I wasn't sure I'd ever have the chance to find out if you were okay after last night." Hazel settled into the chair across from him, and Julian noticed that she'd chosen the seat facing the door, a small detail that suggested she was someone who preferred to maintain awareness of her surroundings. "I'm perfectly fine, thanks. Entirely to your intervention. I understand, however, that the same cannot be said for your employment status." Julian felt heat rise in his cheeks. "How did you—" "I made some inquiries," Hazel said simply. "I also discovered that Derek Hawthorne has been making calls to other companies in the area, sharing his version of last night's events. He's painting you as unstable and unreliable." The confirmation of his worst fears hit Julian like a physical blow. "I see. I'm furious about it," Hazel continued, her green eyes flashing with anger. "What happened last night was harassment, pure and simple. Your response was exactly what any decent person would have done, and you're being punished for it while he faces no consequences whatsoever." Julian appreciated her outrage on his behalf, but he also felt the need to be practical. "I knew there would be consequences when I decided to get involved. Derek Hawthorne isn't exactly known for his forgiving nature." "Tell me about yourself, Julian," Hazel said, leaning forward with genuine interest. "How did you end up working nights at Phoenix Manufacturing?" The question was more complex than she could possibly realize. Julian took a sip of his coffee, buying time to decide how much of his story to share with this woman who was still essentially a stranger, despite the extraordinary circumstances of their meeting. "It's a long story," he said finally. "I have time." Something in her tone, patient, non-judgmental, genuinely interested, encouraged Julian to open up in a way he rarely did with anyone outside his small circle of close friends and family. 5 years ago, I was Dr. Julian Perry, he began. I had a PhD in environmental engineering from Caltech and was working as a senior researcher at Meridian Environmental Solutions in San Francisco. I specialized in industrial waste management and pollution remediation, finding ways to help companies reduce their environmental impact while maintaining profitability. Hazel's eyebrows rose in surprise, but she didn't interrupt. I was married to Sarah, who was a pediatric nurse at UCSF. We had Emma when I was 28, and life seemed perfect. I was being considered for a promotion to department head. Sarah loved her work with sick families, and Emma was this incredible little person who made everything brighter just by existing. Julian's voice grew quieter as he approached the difficult part of his story. When Emma was 2, Sarah started having severe headaches. At first, we thought it was stress from her job. Pediatric oncology is emotionally demanding work. But the headaches got worse, and she started having dizzy spells and memory lapses. Hazel's expression softened with understanding and sympathy. The diagnosis was glioblastoma, Julian continued, an aggressive brain tumor. The doctors gave her 12 to 18 months, but Sarah was determined to fight. We tried everything: surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, experimental treatments. She survived for 2 years, but the medical bills were astronomical, even with insurance. We exhausted our savings, mortgaged the house, borrowed against my retirement fund. I'm so sorry, Hazel said softly. Sarah died on a Tuesday morning in March, Julian said, the memory still sharp after 3 years. Emma was 4 years old and couldn't understand why Mommy wasn't coming home from the hospital. I had to take extended leave from work to help her through the grief and adjustment, but Meridian was understanding. They held my position and even helped with some of the final medical expenses. Julian paused, staring out the cafe window at the pedestrians walking past, people going about their normal lives without the weight of loss and financial catastrophe hanging over them. I thought I could return to work after a few months. He continued. But Emma was having nightmares, behavioral issues at daycare, separation anxiety, whenever I left her sight. The grief counselor said she needed stability and routine, that dramatic changes in her environment could cause lasting psychological damage. So you stayed home with her for 8 months. I used up all my leave time, then took unpaid time off. Meridian was patient, but eventually they had to fill my position. I was offered a consulting arrangement, working from home on a project basis, but the income was inconsistent and Emma still needed constant attention. Julian managed a wry smile. Turns out that being a single father to a traumatized 4-year-old, while trying to rebuild your career, is more challenging than any environmental engineering problem I'd ever solved. What happened to your financial situation? The medical debt was crushing. Even after Sarah's life insurance payout, we owed over $200,000 to various hospitals and treatment centers. I had to sell the house, liquidate everything of value, and declare bankruptcy. Emma and I moved to Millbrook because the cost of living was lower, and I found the job at Phoenix Manufacturing. Hazel was quiet for a long moment, processing the magnitude of his life's upheaval. You gave up everything for your daughter. I traded everything for my daughter, Julian corrected. My career, my financial security, my professional identity, all of it was less important than making sure Emma felt safe and loved. The night shift at Phoenix was perfect because it allowed me to maintain a normal schedule with her. She never had to feel abandoned or neglected, even though we went from living in a 4-bedroom house in the suburbs to a 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. Does she understand what you sacrificed? Julian shook his head. She remembers her mother, but she doesn't understand the financial implications of Sarah's illness or why we had to move. As far as Emma knows, we live in Millbrook because Daddy has a good job here and we're perfectly happy. I've worked very hard to preserve her sense of security, which is now threatened because you helped me. The stark truth of the statement hung between them. Julian had rebuilt his life around providing Emma with stability, and in a single impulsive moment, he jeopardized everything again. I don't regret helping you, Julian said firmly. What Derek Hawthorne was doing was wrong, and I couldn't stand by and watch it happen. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't terrified about what comes next for Emma and me. Hazel reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the table to Julian. He glanced down and felt his world tilt slightly off its axis. The card read, Hazel Price, CEO, Price Industries. Below the title was an address in Chicago and contact information for what Julian recognized as one of the largest privately held manufacturing conglomerates in the Midwest. You single quotes re ... Julian began, then stopped, unable to finish the sentence. I'm the CEO of a company that owns 37 manufacturing facilities across 12 states, Hazel said calmly. I was in Millbrook yesterday for a potential acquisition meeting. Phoenix Manufacturing has been on our target list for 6 months. Julian stared at her in shock. You were there to buy Phoenix Manufacturing. I was there to evaluate whether Phoenix Manufacturing was worth buying, Hazel corrected. After last night's encounter with Derek Hawthorne, and after learning about your termination today, I've made my decision. She leaned forward, her green eyes intense with purpose. Julian, I want to offer you something that will change both of our lives. But first, I need to know, are you interested in returning to environmental engineering? Julian's mind reeled with the implications of her question and the possibilities it suggested. Emma's innocent faith in happy endings suddenly seemed less like childish optimism and more like prophecy. What exactly are you proposing? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Hazel smiled, and Julian realized that his life was about to change in ways he'd never dared to imagine. Hazel reached into her briefcase and withdrew a thick folder, placing it on the table between them with the careful precision of someone accustomed to life-changing negotiations. Julian noticed that her hands were steady, confident, This was clearly not her first time delivering news that would fundamentally alter someone's existence. Price Industries is more than just a manufacturing conglomerate, Hazel began, her voice taking on the focused intensity of a CEO presenting to a board of directors. We're committed to sustainable manufacturing practices and environmental responsibility. It's not just good PR, it's core to our business model and long-term profitability. Julian nodded, still processing the revelation that the woman he'd helped was one of the most powerful business leaders in the region. That's impressive, but I'm not sure I understand how this relates to my situation. 3 months ago, I authorized the creation of a new executive position, Director of Environmental Compliance and Innovation. The role would involve traveling to our various facilities, assessing their environmental impact, and developing comprehensive strategies to reduce waste, improve efficiency, and ensure compliance with increasingly strict environmental regulations. Hazel opened the folder and slid a job description across the table. Julian's eyes widened as he scanned the document. The position description read like a wish list of everything he'd loved about his previous career, with added responsibilities that would challenge him to grow beyond his previous expertise. The salary range is $180,000 to $220,000 annually, depending on experience, Hazel continued matter-of-factly. Full benefits, including comprehensive health coverage, dental, vision, and a college savings plan. Company car, travel expenses, and performance bonuses tied to measurable environmental improvements across our facilities. Julian's coffee cup trembled slightly in his hands. The salary alone was more than 5 times what he'd been earning at Phoenix Manufacturing. The benefits package would eliminate every financial worry that had kept him awake at night for the past 3 years. This is incredibly generous, Julian said carefully. But I have to ask, why me? Surely you have access to hundreds of qualified candidates with current experience and without employment gaps. Hazel's expression grew serious. You're right. I could hire someone with a more traditional resume. But I've learned that technical qualifications are only part of what makes someone truly valuable. Character matters more than credentials, and integrity is rarer than expertise. She leaned forward, her green eyes intense. Last night, you saw someone in distress and chose to help, even though you knew it could cost you your job. You put another person's safety above your own security. That kind of moral courage can't be taught or trained. It's fundamental to who you are. Julian felt overwhelmed by her assessment. I just did what anyone should have done. But most people wouldn't have, Hazel replied bluntly. Most people would have kept walking, told themselves it wasn't their business, convinced themselves that the situation wasn't as serious as it appeared. You didn't. You acted, despite the personal cost. She pulled another document from the folder. Price Industries needs someone who will tell me the hard truths about our environmental practices, even when those truths are expensive or inconvenient. We need someone who will prioritize doing what's right over doing what's easy. Your actions last night prove that you're that person. Julian studied the employment contract she'd placed before him, his trained engineer's mind automatically analyzing the terms and conditions. Everything seemed not just fair, but extraordinarily generous. There was even a relocation assistance package worth $25,000 to help with moving expenses. The position would be based in Chicago, Hazel explained, but it involves significant travel. Approximately 40% of your time would be spent visiting our facilities, conducting assessments, and implementing improvements. The rest would be office-based, developing policies and analyzing data. What about Emma? Julian asked, the question that mattered most to him. Price Industries has an excellent partnership with several top-rated private schools in the Chicago area. Emma would have access to educational opportunities that might not be available in Millbrook. We also have on-site childcare for employees, families, and our corporate policy includes flexible scheduling for parents. Julian felt a surge of hope so powerful It was almost frightening. The opportunity Hazel was offering would solve every practical problem in his life while returning him to work he was passionate about. But something nagged at him about the timing and circumstances. "Can I ask you something?" Julian said. "How long have you been planning to acquire Phoenix Manufacturing?" 6 months, as I mentioned. "And this position, when did you create it?" Hazel's slight smile suggested she'd been expecting this question. "The position was approved 3 months ago, but we hadn't begun the search process yet. We were waiting until after several acquisition deals were completed. So this isn't a position you created because you feel guilty about my situation?" "No," Hazel said firmly. "This is a position we needed to fill regardless. The fact that you're the perfect candidate became clear after I researched your background this morning. Your termination from Phoenix Manufacturing was wrong and unfair, but it also freed you to pursue opportunities that would have been impossible while you were employed there." Julian appreciated her directness. "You mentioned acquisition. Are you buying Phoenix Manufacturing?" Hazel's expression hardened slightly. "As of this morning, Price Industries has made an offer to acquire Phoenix Manufacturing for $47 million. The offer was accepted an hour ago." Julian nearly choked on his coffee. "You bought the entire company?" "I bought a company that fits our strategic expansion plans and has valuable manufacturing capabilities," Hazel clarified. "The fact that Derek Hawthorne works there is an ancillary consideration. What happens to the employees?" "Most will be retained. We believe in preserving jobs and maintaining operational continuity during acquisitions. However, we'll be conducting a comprehensive review of all management positions to ensure they align with our corporate values and standards of professional conduct." The implication was clear. Derek Hawthorne's days at the company were numbered, regardless of his revenue, generation, or corporate connections. "This is all happening very fast," Julian said, still struggling to process the rapid sequence of events. "Sometimes opportunities arise suddenly," Hazel replied. "The question is whether you're prepared to seize them when they do." Julian looked down at Emma's latest drawing, which he'd tucked into his jacket pocket that morning. A picture of the two of them holding hands under a rainbow, with the words, "My daddy is a hero," written in purple crayon at the bottom. "I need to think about this," Julian said. It would mean uprooting Emma from everything familiar, moving to a new city, starting over again. "Of course. This is a major life decision that affects both of you. Take whatever time you need." "How much time do I have?" "The position needs to be filled within 30 days, Hazel said. "But I'm hoping you'll give me an answer by the end of the week. I have a feeling that Emma might be more adaptable than you're giving her credit for." As if on cue, Julian's phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Patterson. "Emma is home from school and wants to know if you'll be back in time to help with her science project about recycling and the environment." Julian showed the message to Hazel, who laughed. "That's remarkably appropriate timing. Emma has always been interested in environmental issues," Julian explained. "She's constantly asking questions about why people throw away things that could be reused, why factories make smoke, how we can help animals and plants. I think she inherited my curiosity about how systems work and how they can be improved. She sounds like a remarkable young lady. I'd love to meet her sometime if you'd be comfortable with that." Julian felt a moment of protective hesitation, then realized that if he accepted this position, Hazel would become an important part of their lives. Emma would need to trust her, and Hazel would need to understand the responsibilities that came with employing a single father. "Actually," Julian said, making a spontaneous decision, "would you like to join us for dinner tonight? Emma is making what she calls recycled pasta, basically spaghetti with whatever leftovers we have in the refrigerator. It's not fancy, but it would give you a chance to see what you'd be taking on if you hire me." Hazel's formal business demeanor softened into something warmer and more personal. "I would love that. Should I bring anything? Just yourself. And maybe prepare for a lot of questions about how factories work and whether you've ever seen a real eagle. As they stood to leave the cafe, Hazel handed Julian her business card and the employment contract. Think about it, Julian. This could be a fresh start for both of you. Walking back to his car, Julian felt as if he were moving through a dream. 24 hours ago, he'd been a night janitor with a stable but limited life. Now he was holding a contract that could transform Emma's future and return him to work that mattered. But as Emma had said that morning, sometimes everything really did work out okay in the end. Maybe his 7-year-old daughter understood something about the universe that adults had forgotten, that kindness and courage, even when they seemed costly, had a way of creating unexpected opportunities for those brave enough to act on their principles. The question now was whether Julian was brave enough to accept the life that Hazel Price was offering, and whether he could trust that this unexpected gift was real and lasting. As he drove home to Emma, Julian realized that for the first time in 3 years, he was genuinely excited about the future. The aroma of garlic and herbs filled Julian's modest apartment as he stood at the stove, stirring the recycled pasta that had become one of Emma's favorite meals. The dish was born out of necessity, a creative way to use leftovers and stretch their grocery budget, but Emma had embraced it as a culinary adventure, always eager to suggest new ingredients to add to the mix. "Daddy, when is the lady coming?" Emma asked for the 4th time in 10 minutes, bouncing excitedly on the balls of her feet as she set the small dining table with their mismatched plates and silverware. "Her name is Hazel, and she'll be here in about 15 minutes, Julian replied, checking his watch. He still couldn't quite believe that Hazel Price, CEO of a multi-million-dollar corporation, was coming to their humble apartment for dinner. The contrast between her world and theirs was so vast it seemed almost surreal. Is she really the boss of a whole company? Emma asked, carefully folding paper napkins she'd decorated with crayon drawings of flowers and smiley faces. She is. A very big company with lots of people working for her. Emma nodded seriously, processing this information with the matter-of-fact acceptance that 7-year-olds brought to most adult complexities. Mrs. Rodriguez says that being a boss means you have to make sure everyone feels happy and safe at work. Do you think Hazel is good at that? Julian paused in his stirring, struck by the simple wisdom of Emma's question. I think she tries to be. That's one of the reasons she might want Daddy to come work for her company. Would we move away from here? The question Julian had been dreading hung in the air between them. He turned from the stove to face his daughter, whose expression had shifted from excitement to uncertainty. Maybe, Julian said gently, kneeling down to her level. If I took the job Hazel offered, we would need to move to Chicago. It's a big city with lots of interesting things to see and do. Would I have to go to a different school? Yes, but it would be a really good school with lots of opportunities to learn new things. Emma bit her lower lip, a gesture she'd inherited from her mother that always made Julian's heart ache with memory. Would Mrs. Patterson come with us? No, sweetheart. Mrs. Patterson lives here in Millbrook. But we could visit her, and she could come visit us too. What about my friends at school? Julian felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. Every decision he made didn't just affect his own life. It shaped Emma's world in ways she was only beginning to understand. The stability he'd worked so hard to create for her would be disrupted once again, just as she was finally settling into the rhythm of life in Millbrook. Change can be scary, Julian said carefully, but sometimes it can also bring wonderful new experiences. Remember when we first moved here from California? You were worried about leaving your old preschool, but then you met Lucy and Sam, and you love your teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez. But what if the new place isn't as good? Then we'll work together to make it good, Julian promised, pulling her into a hug. No matter where we live, the most important thing stays the same, you and me, taking care of each other. The doorbell rang, interrupting their conversation. Emma immediately brightened, her concerns about moving temporarily forgotten in the excitement of meeting their dinner guest. Hazel arrived carrying a bouquet of colorful flowers and a wrapped gift that immediately caught Emma's attention. She had changed from her business suit into dark jeans and a soft blue sweater, an outfit that made her seem more approachable and less intimidating than she had appeared at the cafe. "You must be Emma," Hazel said, crouching down to Emma's eye level with natural ease. "Your dad has told me wonderful things about you. Are those for me?" Emma asked, eyeing the wrapped package with barely contained curiosity. "They are, but maybe we should eat dinner first so you can properly appreciate it," Hazel suggested with a smile. As they sat around the small dining table, Julian watched with amazement as Hazel seamlessly integrated herself into their dinner routine. She complimented Emma's table decorations, asked genuine questions about her school day, and listened with apparent fascination as Emma explained the theory behind recycled pasta and its environmental benefits. "So you take food that might go to waste and create something completely new?" Hazel asked, twirling spaghetti around her fork with the same concentration Emma used. "Exactly," Emma beamed with pride. "Daddy taught me that throwing away food is bad for the planet because it makes methane gas in the garbage dumps. But if you use leftovers creatively, you help the environment and save money." Hazel caught Julian's eye across the table, her expression conveying impressed surprise at Emma's sophisticated understanding of environmental concepts. After dinner, Emma carefully unwrapped Hazel's gift to reveal a beautifully illustrated book about renewable energy and sustainable living, written at a level appropriate for her age group. "This is perfect," Julian said, genuinely touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Emma loves books about science and the environment." "I can read some of it myself," Emma announced, already flipping through the colorful pages. "And Daddy can help me with the big words." As Emma settled on the couch with her new book, Julian and Hazel moved to the small balcony overlooking the quiet street below. The evening air was cool and pleasant, with the distant sounds of family life drifting from neighboring apartments. "She's remarkable," Hazel said quietly. "Intelligent, curious, well-adjusted despite everything she's been through. You've done an incredible job raising her. Thank you. She's been my motivation for everything I've done these past 3 years." "I can see that. I can also see how difficult the decision about this job offer must be for you." Julian leaned against the balcony railing, watching a family walk by on the sidewalk below, parents pushing a stroller while an older child rode a bicycle alongside them. "The opportunity you're offering is beyond anything I could have hoped for. The salary, the benefits, the chance to return to meaningful work, it would solve every practical problem in our lives. But Emma has already lost so much. Her mother, our old life in California, the security of having extended family nearby. She's finally settled here, made friends, adjusted to our new normal. Is it fair to uproot her again for my career aspirations?" Hazel was quiet for a moment, considering his dilemma. "Can I share something with you about my own childhood?" Julian nodded. "My father was in the military, and we moved every 2 to 3 years throughout my childhood. Different states, different countries, different schools, and friends left behind. Each time, I hated it as a kid, the constant goodbyes, the effort of always being the new person, the feeling that I never had a true home. That sounds difficult. It was. But it also taught me resilience, adaptability, and independence. I learned to make friends quickly, to find my footing in new environments, to see change as an adventure rather than a threat. Those skills have been invaluable in my career and personal life." Julian understood the parallel she was drawing, but he also felt the need to advocate for Emma's current stability. Emma isn't a military kid who's been conditioned to expect frequent moves. This kind of change could be traumatic for her. Or it could be exactly what she needs to discover her full potential, Hazel countered gently. The schools in Chicago that Price Industries partners with have programs for gifted students, advanced science labs, opportunities for environmental education that don't exist in Millbrook. Emma is clearly brilliant. Shouldn't she have access to resources that can nurture that brilliance? Through the sliding glass door, they could see Emma curled up on the couch, completely absorbed in her new book. Her lips moved slightly as she sounded out unfamiliar words, her brow furrowed in concentration. "There's something else you should know," Hazel said, her tone becoming more businesslike. "I've been making inquiries about Derek Hawthorne's campaign to damage your reputation in the local job market. It's worse than we initially thought." Julian felt his stomach clench. "How much worse?" "He's contacted 16 different companies in the Millbrook area, painting you as unstable, unreliable, and potentially violent. He's suggesting that you have anger management issues and pose a risk to workplace safety." The extent of Hawthorne's vindictiveness was staggering. "He's systematically trying to destroy my ability to find work here. He's succeeding. I had my people reach out to several companies on your behalf, using hypothetical scenarios. The response was universally negative. Derek Hawthorne's influence in this community is significant, and he's using all of it against you." Julian felt the walls of his carefully constructed life in Millbrook closing in around him. "So even if I don't take your offer, I may not be able to find comparable employment here anyway. That's the reality of the situation, yes. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but I thought you needed to understand the full scope of what you're facing." The practical implications were clear. Staying in Millbrook might mean accepting a significant step down in employment, possibly retail or restaurant work that wouldn't provide adequate health insurance or stability for Emma. The security he'd been trying to preserve by staying might already be lost. "There's one more thing," Hazel added. "The acquisition of Phoenix Manufacturing will be completed within 2 weeks. As the new owner, I'll be conducting a comprehensive review of all personnel and business practices. Derek Hawthorne will be terminated for cause, based on documented patterns of harassment and misconduct." Julian felt a surge of satisfaction. At the news, followed immediately by concern. "Won't that just make him more vindictive? He'll know that my connection to you led to his firing. Let me worry about Derek Hawthorne. I have resources and legal protections that you don't. What I need from you is a decision about your future." Julian looked through the glass door at Emma, who had fallen asleep on the couch with the book still open in her lap. Her face was peaceful, trusting, completely confident that her father would make the right choices for their life together. "How long do I have to decide?" Julian asked. "I need an answer by Friday," Hazel said. "The position needs to be filled quickly, and there are logistics to consider if you accept: relocation assistance, school enrollment for Emma, transitioning you into the role. 4 days to make a decision that would determine the trajectory of both their lives." Julian felt the weight of responsibility and the parallel excitement of possibility warring within him, as Hazel prepared to leave. Emma woke up just enough to give her a sleepy hug and thank her for the book. "Will you come have dinner with us again?" Emma asked with the innocent directness of childhood. "I hope so," Hazel replied, glancing meaningfully at Julian. "That depends on your dad." After Hazel left, Julian carried Emma to her bed and tucked her in with her favorite stuffed elephant. As he turned to leave, her sleepy voice stopped him. "Daddy, I like Hazel. She listens when I talk, and she gave me a really good book. I'm glad you liked her, sweetheart. If we moved to Chicago, would I get to see her more?" Julian was surprised by the question. "Probably yes. Why?" "Because I think she's lonely. Really successful people are sometimes lonely because other people are scared of them. But I'm not scared of her." Once again, Emma's perceptive wisdom caught Julian off guard. "What makes you think she's lonely?" The way she smiled when we invited her to stay for dessert. Like she doesn't get invited to things very often. Emma yawned and snuggled deeper into her pillow. Maybe if we moved to Chicago, we could be her family too. Not like a real family, but like chosen family. Mrs. Rodriguez taught us about that. As Julian kissed Emma's forehead and turned off her bedroom light, he realized that his 7-year-old daughter might have just provided the clarity he'd been searching for. Emma wasn't just resilient, she was wise, empathetic, and ready for whatever adventures lay ahead. The question was whether Julian was brave enough to trust in their shared future and take the leap that would change everything. Friday was only 4 days away, and the decision that would reshape their lives was waiting for his answer. Thursday morning arrived with an unseasonably cold rain that turned Millbrook's streets into rivers of gray water and reflected neon. Julian stood at his apartment window, watching Emma's school bus disappear around the corner, when his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. Julian Perry? The voice was crisp, professional, but carried an undertone of concern that immediately put Julian on alert. Speaking. This is Amanda Chun, Director of Human Resources at Price Industries. Ms. Price asked me to contact you regarding some irregularities that have come to our attention concerning your background verification. Julian's blood ran cold. Irregularities? We've received several concerning communications about your employment history and character references. I think it would be best if we discuss this in person. Are you available to meet today? The carefully neutral tone couldn't mask the seriousness of the situation. Julian's mind raced through possible explanations, but he already knew the source of these irregularities. Derek Hawthorne wasn't content with simply destroying Julian's prospects in Millbrook. He was actively sabotaging the opportunity with Price Industries. Of course, where would you like to meet? There's a conference room available at the Millbrook Business Center on Oak Street. Can you be there at 2 p.m.? I'll be there. After hanging up, Julian sat heavily on his couch, staring at the employment contract from Price Industries that lay on his coffee table. He'd spent the past 3 days reviewing the terms, researching schools in Chicago, and slowly building excitement about the possibility of returning to meaningful work. Now it seemed Derek Hawthorne was determined to poison even this unexpected opportunity. Julian's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Thought you should see this. Attached was a screenshot of an email that made Julian's hands shake with rage. The email was from Derek Hawthorne's Phoenix Manufacturing account, addressed to multiple recipients at Price Industries' corporate headquarters in Chicago. The subject line read, urgent, character concerns regarding Julian Perry. Julian read the email with growing horror. Dear Price Industries leadership team, I understand that you may be considering Julian Perry for a position within your organization. As his former supervisor at Phoenix Manufacturing, I feel obligated to share concerns about Mr. Perry's character and professional conduct that may not have emerged during your standard verification process that Mr. Perry was terminated from Phoenix Manufacturing due to a serious incident involving inappropriate and aggressive behavior toward a female visitor to our facility. Security footage shows him approaching and confronting the woman in our parking garage after hours, despite having no legitimate reason to be in that area. When instructed by management to cease his involvement, Mr. Perry became belligerent and insubordinate. Our internal investigation revealed a pattern of concerning behavior, including unauthorized access to restricted areas, failure to follow direct supervisory instructions, aggressive confrontation with visiting executives, potential stalking behavior toward female employees. Mr. Perry has also shown signs of mental instability, which we believe may be related to unresolved grief issues following his wife's death. Several colleagues reported erratic behavior and inappropriate emotional outbursts during his employment here. I would strongly recommend conducting Additional psychological evaluation and background screening before considering Mr. Perry for any position involving contact with clients, executives, or female colleagues. His behavior suggests someone who may pose a risk to workplace safety and your company's professional reputation. Please contact me directly if you require additional documentation or clarification regarding these serious concerns. Sincerely, Derek. Hawthorne, Head of Sales, Phoenix Manufacturing. Julian read the email twice, each word hitting him like a physical blow. Hawthorne hadn't just distorted the truth. He'd created an elaborate fiction that painted Julian as unstable, aggressive, and potentially dangerous. Worse, he'd weaponized Julian's grief over Sarah's death, turning his greatest personal tragedy into evidence of mental instability. The genius of Hawthorne's strategy was its subtle mixture of truth and lies. The basic facts were accurate. Julian had approached Hazel in the parking garage, had been in an area outside his normal duties, had been terminated afterward. But Hawthorne had twisted each fact into something sinister, creating a narrative that would be difficult to disprove without revealing Hazel's identity and the circumstances of her harassment. Julian's phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed Hazel's number. Julian, I assume you've heard from our HR department by now. Amanda Chun called this morning. She wants to meet at 2 p.m. to discuss irregularities in my background verification. Hazel's voice was tight with controlled anger. Derek Hawthorne sent a detailed character assassination to our corporate headquarters. He's painted you as unstable and potentially violent, using your wife's death as evidence of psychological problems. I saw the email, Julian said quietly. Someone sent me a screenshot. I'm furious about this, Hazel said. It's a vindictive attack designed to destroy not just this opportunity, but your ability to find employment anywhere. The man has crossed every line of professional conduct. What does this mean for the position? Hazel was quiet for a moment, and Julian could hear papers rustling in the background. Officially, Price Industries has policies requiring investigation of any serious allegations against potential employees. The board of directors is extremely risk-averse, especially regarding positions with executive-level access and responsibility. And unofficially, I know Derek Hawthorne is a vindictive liar who's trying to destroy a good man's life out of wounded pride. But I have to be careful about how I handle this. If I'm seen as dismissing legitimate concerns to hire someone I have a personal connection to, it could undermine my credibility with the board and executive team. Julian felt the walls closing in around him. So you're saying the position is off the table? I'm saying we need to handle this very carefully. The meeting with Amanda Chun is crucial. She's smart, fair, and has excellent instincts about people. If you can convince her that Hawthorne's allegations are false, she'll advocate for you with the board. How am I supposed to prove a negative? How do I prove I'm not unstable or dangerous? By being yourself, Hazel said firmly. By telling the truth about what happened that night, about your character, about your motivations. Amanda Chun has been with Price Industries for 8 years. She's seen every type of corporate manipulation and character assassination. She recognizes Hawthorne's tactics for what they are. What if she doesn't? What if the board decides I'm too much of a risk? Hazel's voice softened. Then we'll find another way. This isn't the only path forward, Julian. But it's the one we're fighting for right now. After ending the call, Julian spent the morning researching Amanda Chun and preparing for what felt like the most important interview of his life. Chun had an impressive background, MBA from Northwestern, 8 years with Price Industries, a reputation for fairness and thorough investigation. Her LinkedIn profile showed involvement with several professional organizations focused on ethical business practices. At 1:45 p.m., Julian arrived at the Millbrook Business Center, a modern building that housed temporary office space and conference rooms for traveling professionals. The rain had intensified, and Julian's umbrella had proven inadequate against the wind-driven downpour. He arrived damp and disheveled, hardly the image of executive competence he'd hoped to project. Amanda Chun was waiting in conference room B, a woman in her early 40s with short black hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She wore a navy business suit and had several folders arranged precisely on the conference table. "Mr. Perry, thank you for coming on short notice," she said, gesturing for him to take the seat across from her. "I'm sure you're wondering about the nature of these allegations and how they might affect your potential employment with Price Industries." Julian replied honestly. "I'm also wondering how Derek Hawthorne obtained your corporate contact information and why he felt compelled to contact you directly rather than responding to standard employment verification requests." Chun's slight smile suggested that Julian had asked exactly the right question. "That's an excellent point. Mr. Hawthorne's proactive outreach to our organization is unusual, in my experience. Legitimate concerns about former employees are typically raised only when specifically requested during reference checks." She opened the first folder and withdrew a printed copy of Hawthorne's email. "I've read Mr. Hawthorne's allegations carefully. They paint a picture of someone who is unstable, aggressive, and potentially dangerous. These are serious concerns that Price Industries cannot ignore." Julian felt his carefully prepared responses stick in his throat. "I understand your concerns. However," Chun continued, "I've also reviewed your actual employment record at Phoenix Manufacturing. Perfect attendance for 3 years, no disciplinary actions, consistently positive performance reviews from your direct supervisors. This creates an interesting contradiction." She opened a second folder. "I've also spoken with Margaret Collins, Phoenix Manufacturing's HR director, who provided a very different perspective on your termination. According to Ms. Collins, you were fired for helping a distressed visitor, not for aggressive or inappropriate behavior." Julian felt a surge of gratitude toward Margaret Collins, who had clearly chosen to provide an honest assessment despite potential political consequences. "I've also reviewed the security footage from the night in question," Chen added, and Julian's eyes widened in surprise. "Ms. Price provided it to me yesterday. It shows you approaching a situation where a woman appeared to be cornered and distressed, offering assistance and helping her leave safely. At no point does your behavior appear aggressive or inappropriate." "How did Ms. Price obtain security footage from Phoenix Manufacturing?" Chun's smile became more pronounced. "Price Industries completed the acquisition of Phoenix Manufacturing yesterday. Ms. Price now has access to all company records and security systems. The footage has been preserved and will be used in our internal investigation of Mr. Hawthorne's conduct." The revelation that the acquisition was complete meant that Hawthorne's position at Phoenix Manufacturing was now in Hazel's hands. Julian felt a mixture of relief and apprehension about what would happen next. "Based on my investigation," Chun continued, "I believe Mr. Hawthorne's allegations are malicious and false. However, the board of directors has requested additional verification before approving your hire. They want an independent psychological evaluation and character assessment." Julian's heart sank. "I see. The evaluation will be conducted by Dr. Sarah Martinez, a forensic psychologist who specializes in workplace fitness assessments. It's scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. The process typically takes 2 to 3 hours and includes psychological testing, interviews, and review of your personal and professional history. And if I pass this evaluation, then Price Industries will extend a formal job offer, assuming you're still interested in the position." Julian thought about Emma, about their conversation the night before, about chosen family and new adventures. "I'm still very interested." "Good. There's one more thing you should know. Derek Hawthorne's employment with Phoenix Manufacturing will be terminated tomorrow morning, effective immediately. His actions regarding you constitute harassment and defamation, and Price Industries has zero tolerance for such behavior. As Julian left the business center, he felt cautiously optimistic for the first time since receiving Chun's call that morning. The psychological evaluation was an additional hurdle, but it was also an opportunity to demonstrate his fitness for the position and put Hawthorne's malicious allegations to rest permanently. The rain had stopped, and patches of blue sky were beginning to appear between the gray clouds. Julian took it as a positive sign as he drove home to pick up Emma from school. Tomorrow would determine whether Derek Hawthorne's vindictive campaign would succeed in destroying Julian's future, or whether truth and justice would finally prevail. Ultimate test was just hours away. Dr. Sarah Martinez's office occupied the entire 15th floor of the Meridian Professional Building in downtown Millbrook, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city below. Julian arrived 15 minutes early for his 9 a.m. appointment, using the extra time to study the diplomas and certifications that lined the reception area walls. Dr. Martinez's credentials were impressive: Ph.D. in clinical psychology from Johns Hopkins, specialization in forensic psychology and workplace assessments, published researcher in the field of psychological fitness evaluations. The receptionist, a kind-faced woman in her 60s, offered Julian coffee and assured him that Dr. Martinez was looking forward to their session. Julian declined the caffeine, knowing his nerves were already running high enough without additional stimulation. At exactly 9 a.m., Dr. Martinez emerged from her office. She was a woman in her early 50s with graying brown hair and warm brown eyes that seemed to take in everything about Julian in a single glance. She wore a professional but approachable outfit, a burgundy blazer over dark slacks, and her handshake was firm and confident. "Mr. Perry, thank you for coming in today. I know this process can feel intimidating, but I want you to know that my role is to conduct a fair and thorough assessment, not to validate or disprove anyone's preconceptions about you." Julian appreciated her directness. "I understand. I'm here to answer any questions you have honestly and completely." Dr. Martinez's office was designed to be both professional and comfortable, with soft lighting, neutral colors, and 2 leather chairs positioned at an angle that encouraged conversation rather than confrontation. She gestured for Julian to take one chair while she settled into the other, a thick folder and digital tablet within easy reach. "I've reviewed the allegations made by Derek Hawthorne," Dr. Martinez began without preamble. "I've also reviewed your employment history, personal background, and the security footage from the incident in question. Today's evaluation will help me determine whether there's any factual basis for Mr. Hawthorne's concerns about your psychological fitness and potential risk to workplace safety." Julian nodded, feeling the weight of everything that depended on the next few hours. Emma's future, his career prospects, their financial security, all of it rested on his ability to demonstrate his mental stability and professional competence to this woman who would ultimately decide his fate. "Let's start with your personal history," Dr. Martinez said, consulting her notes. "You lost your wife Sarah to brain cancer 3 years ago, after a prolonged illness that resulted in significant medical debt and career disruption. How has that experience affected your mental health and emotional stability?" The question went straight to the heart of Hawthorne's accusations. Julian took a deep breath, knowing that his answer would set the tone for everything that followed. "Sarah's illness and death were the most devastating experiences of my life," Julian said honestly. "I went through periods of depression, anxiety, and overwhelming grief. I sought counseling both during her illness and after her death, and I continue to see a therapist periodically when I need support managing the ongoing challenges of single parenthood." Dr. Martinez made notes on her tablet. "That sounds like a healthy response to trauma. Can you tell me about any instances where your grief or stress may have affected your professional performance or interpersonal relationships?" Julian considered the question carefully. During the 8 months after Sarah's death, when I was out of work caring for Emma, I was probably not at my best emotionally. I was overwhelmed, exhausted, and struggling to figure out how to be both father and mother to a traumatized 4-year-old. But once I started working at Phoenix Manufacturing, I was very careful to keep my personal struggles separate from my professional responsibilities. How did you manage that separation? Partly through therapy, partly through establishing clear routines and boundaries. My shift was from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., which meant I could be fully present for Emma during her waking hours and process my own emotions during work hours when necessary. I never brought personal problems into the workplace or allowed them to affect my job performance. Dr. Martinez nodded thoughtfully. I've spoken with Margaret Collins, your former HR director, and your direct supervisor at Phoenix Manufacturing. Both described you as reliable, professional, and emotionally stable throughout your employment there. How do you reconcile that with Mr. Hawthorne's allegations about erratic behavior and emotional outbursts? Julian felt a surge of anger at the mention of Hawthorne's lies, but he kept his voice steady. I can't reconcile it because it's not true. Derek Hawthorne had minimal contact with me during my 3 years at Phoenix Manufacturing. His allegations are based on a single incident where I intervened to help a woman who was being harassed. His description of my behavior is completely false. Tell me about that incident in your own words. Julian recounted the events of that night in detail, his routine security rounds, hearing the distressed voices in the parking garage, witnessing Hawthorne's harassment of Hazel, his decision to intervene, and the immediate consequences that followed. As he spoke, Dr. Martinez took detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions about his thought process and motivations. At what point did you decide to intervene? She asked. When I heard the fear in the woman's voice and realized that Derek Hawthorne was using his size and position to intimidate her. She was clearly trying to leave, and he was preventing her from doing so. Did you consider the potential consequences to your employment? Julian nodded. I knew immediately that intervening could cost me my job. Phoenix Manufacturing has strict policies about interaction with executives and visitors. But I couldn't stand by and watch someone be harassed, regardless of the personal cost. That suggests a strong moral compass and willingness to act on your principles, even when it's personally disadvantageous, Dr. Martinez observed. Some might call that admirable character rather than instability. The validation of his actions felt like a weight lifting from Julian's shoulders. For the first time since this ordeal began, someone in authority was acknowledging that his behavior had been appropriate rather than problematic. Dr. Martinez continued the interview for another hour, covering Julian's relationship with Emma, his coping strategies for single parenthood, his career goals and motivations, and his understanding of appropriate workplace behavior. Her questions were thorough but never felt invasive or accusatory. Now I'd like to conduct some standardized psychological assessments, Dr. Martinez explained, producing a tablet loaded with various testing software. These will measure things like emotional stability, stress management, impulse control, and interpersonal skills. There are no right or wrong answers. I'm simply looking for patterns that might indicate psychological concerns. The testing took nearly 2 hours and covered everything from personality assessments to cognitive function evaluations. Julian answered each question honestly, trusting that his genuine responses would demonstrate his psychological fitness better than any attempt to game the system. As he completed the final assessment, Dr. Martinez reviewed his results on her computer. Her expression remained neutral, but Julian thought he detected a slight softening around her eyes. Mr. Perry, I have just a few more questions, and then we'll be finished. First, how do you handle stress and conflict in professional settings? I try to remain calm and focused on solutions rather than blame. I've learned from my experience with Sarah's illness that emotional reactions rarely improve difficult situations. When conflicts arise, I prefer to address them directly, but respectfully. What would you do if you witnessed inappropriate behavior by a colleague or superior in your new position? Julian recognized this as a crucial question, directly related to the incident with Hawthorne. I would report it through appropriate channels, document the incident thoroughly, and ensure that any victims receive necessary support. If the situation posed an immediate risk to someone's safety, I would intervene as I did in the parking garage, regardless of the personal consequences. Dr. Martinez made a final note and set down her tablet. That concludes our formal assessment. I'll need some time to compile and analyze the results, but I want to share my preliminary impressions with you. Julian felt his heart rate accelerate. Everything depended on what she said next. Based on our interview and the assessment results, I see no evidence whatsoever of the psychological concerns described in Derek Hawthorne's allegations. You demonstrate excellent emotional regulation, strong moral reasoning, appropriate stress, management skills, and a clear understanding of professional boundaries. Julian felt tears of relief threatening to blur his vision. Thank you. More than that, Dr. Martinez continued, you show exactly the kind of character traits that organizations should want in their employees: integrity, courage, empathy, and the ability to act decisively when ethical principles are at stake. Derek Hawthorne's characterization of your behavior as unstable or dangerous is not just inaccurate, it's the opposite of what the evidence shows. As Julian prepared to leave, Dr. Martinez offered one final comment. I'll be submitting my report to Price Industries this afternoon with a strong recommendation that they proceed with your employment. But I also want you to know that regardless of what happens with this specific opportunity, you should feel confident about your psychological fitness and professional capabilities. Don't let one person's vindictive lies define how you see yourself. Julian walked out of the Meridian Professional Building feeling lighter than he had in days. The psychological evaluation that had seemed like such a threatening obstacle had instead become a validation of his character and fitness for the position at Price Industries. His phone buzzed with a text message as he reached his car. The message was from Hazel. How did it go? Julian typed back, better than I could have hoped. Dr. Martinez will be recommending me for the position. His phone rang almost immediately. Julian, that's wonderful news. Hazel's voice was filled with excitement and relief. I knew you'd prove Hawthorne's allegations were false. What happens now? Now we wait for the board's final decision, which should come this afternoon. But I have another piece of news that I think you'll find satisfying. Derek Hawthorne was terminated from Phoenix Manufacturing an hour ago. Security escorted him from the building, and his access to company systems has been revoked. Julian felt a surge of vindictive satisfaction, followed immediately by concern. How did he react? About as well as you'd expect. He made threats about legal action and claimed the termination was retaliatory. But our legal team has documented his pattern of harassment and misconduct thoroughly. He has no grounds for any kind of lawsuit. Will this affect the board's decision? About my employment? It should actually help, Hazel explained. The board now has clear evidence that Hawthorne's allegations were part of a vindictive campaign against you, rather than legitimate concerns about your fitness for employment. Combined with Dr. Martinez's recommendation, I'm confident they'll approve your hire. As Julian drove home to pick up Emma from school, he reflected on how dramatically his life had changed in just 1 week. 7 days ago, he'd been a night janitor with a stable but limited existence. Now he was on the verge of returning to his chosen profession, with opportunities he'd never dared to imagine. But more than the professional prospects, Julian felt proud of the choices he'd made throughout this ordeal. He'd acted with integrity when it would have been easier to stay silent. He'd faced false accusations with honesty rather than defensiveness. He'd trusted in the ultimate triumph of truth over lies. Emma would be proud of him, he realized. And, perhaps more importantly, Sarah would have been proud too. The ultimate test had been passed. Now it was time to see what the future held for both of them. Julian's phone rang at exactly 15 p.m. on Friday afternoon, just as he was helping Emma with her math homework at their small kitchen table. The caller ID showed Hazel's number, and Julian felt his heart rate spike with anticipation. "Julian, I have news." Hazel's voice was warm with excitement. "The board of directors met this morning to review Dr. Martinez's psychological evaluation and Amanda Cheen's investigation report. The vote was unanimous. Price Industries would like to formally offer you the position of Director of Environmental Compliance and Innovation." Julian closed his eyes, feeling 3 years of financial stress and uncertainty lift from his shoulders like a physical weight. "I accept," he said without hesitation. "Excellent. Amanda will be calling you within the hour with all the details: start date, relocation assistance, benefits enrollment. But I wanted to personally deliver the good news and share something else with you." Emma looked up from her homework, sensing the importance of the conversation. Julian gave her an encouraging smile and mouthed, "Good news. Derek Hawthorne was terminated from Phoenix Manufacturing this morning," Hazal continued. "Security escorted him from the building after he was presented with evidence of his harassment campaign against you. He's also been served with a cease and desist order prohibiting any further contact with you or interference with your employment prospects." What was his reaction? About what you'd expect: anger, threats of legal action, claims of unfair treatment. But our legal team has documented everything thoroughly. He has no grounds for any lawsuit, and several companies in Millbrook have already been contacted to clarify the false statements he made about you. Julian felt a surge of vindictive satisfaction, quickly followed by profound relief. The shadow that had hung over his reputation and future prospects was finally lifted. "There's something else," Hazel added, her tone becoming more personal. "Emma mentioned at dinner that she thinks I might be lonely. She's a remarkably perceptive young lady. I was wondering if you'd both like to visit Chicago next weekend to look at apartments and schools before you make your final move. I'd love to show Emma some of the opportunities that will be available to her." Julian looked at his daughter, who was now openly listening to the conversation with bright, curious eyes. "What do you think, sunshine? Want to take a trip to Chicago to see where we might live?" Emma's face lit up with excitement. "Can we see Hazel's office and maybe a real laboratory?" "I'm sure we can arrange that," Julian laughed. Feeling lighter than he had in years. After ending the call, Julian knelt down to Emma's level. "So, what do you think about our big adventure?" Emma threw her arms around his neck. "I think Mommy would be proud of you, Daddy. You helped someone who needed help. And now good things are happening because you were brave." Julian felt tears sting his eyes. His 7-year-old daughter had just articulated something he'd been struggling to understand: that his act of courage in that parking garage had set in motion a chain of events that would transform both their lives. Sometimes, doing the right thing really did lead to the right outcome. 6 months later, Julian stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office on the 23rd floor of Price Industries Chicago headquarters, watching the morning sun reflect off Lake Michigan in the distance. The city stretched out below him, bustling with energy and possibility, a far cry from the quiet streets of Millbrook, where he'd once pushed a janitorial cart through empty corridors. His office walls displayed framed certificates recognizing the environmental improvements he'd implemented across Price Industries facilities: a 40% reduction in waste production, 25% decrease in energy consumption, and 3 major sustainability awards from industry organizations. But the item he treasured most was Emma's latest drawing, prominently displayed on his desk: a picture of the 3 of them, Julian, Emma, and Hazel, standing in front of the Chicago skyline with the words, "Our chosen family," written in purple crayon. "Daddy!" Emma's voice, echoed through the office as she burst through the door, her school uniform slightly disheveled from her after-school science club. At 8 years old, she had grown more confident and curious, thriving in the advanced academic environment of her new school. "How was science club today, sunshine?" Julian asked, pulling her into a hug. "We learned about renewable energy storage systems, and I told Mrs. Franklin about your project at the Wisconsin facility with the solar panels and battery backups. She said maybe you could come speak to our class about environmental engineering." Julian smiled, remembering when Emma used to struggle to pronounce environmental. Now she discussed complex scientific concepts with the enthusiasm of a budding researcher. "I'd love to speak to your class. But right now, we need to get ready. For dinner, Hazel is picking us up at 6. Emma's face brightened even more. "Are we going to that restaurant with the herb garden on the roof?" "We are. It's Hazel's favorite place." As they gathered their things, Julian reflected on how naturally their lives had intertwined with Hazel's over the past months. What had started as professional gratitude had evolved into genuine friendship, and recently, something deeper. Hazel had become a constant presence in their lives, attending Emma's school plays, joining them for weekend trips to museums and parks, even helping with homework when Julian was traveling for work. The transformation in Julian's own sense of purpose was equally profound. He was no longer the invisible night janitor, overlooked and undervalued. He was Dr. Julian Perry again, respected for his expertise, sought after for his insights, making meaningful contributions to environmental sustainability on a corporate scale. The work energized him in ways he'd forgotten were possible. During the drive to dinner, Emma chattered excitedly about her upcoming science fair project, while Hazel listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions that encouraged Emma to think more deeply about her hypotheses. "You know," Hazel said as they were seated at their table overlooking the city, "I've been thinking about something Emma said a few months ago about chosen family." Julian felt his pulse quicken, sensing the importance of whatever Hazel was about to say. "I've spent my entire adult life focused on business success, convinced that professional achievement was enough to create a fulfilling life, but watching you two, being welcomed into your world, has shown me what I was missing." She reached across the table and took Julian's hand. "I love you both. I love Emma's curiosity and wisdom. I love your integrity and courage. And I love the way you've made me feel like I belong somewhere for the first time in my life." Julian felt tears blur his vision as he squeezed her hand. "We love you too." Emma, who had been listening with the serious attention she brought to all important adult conversations, suddenly announced, "Does this mean we're officially a real family now, not just chosen family?" Hazel laughed, the sound warm and full of joy. "I think it does, if that's what everyone wants." As Julian looked around the table at the two most important people in his world, he thought about the circuitous path that had brought them here. A single act of courage in a parking garage had cost him one life and given him another, better, richer, more meaningful than anything he could have imagined. Emma had been right that night when she'd said everything always works out okay in the end. Sometimes it just takes longer than expected, and sometimes the happy ending looks different than what you originally planned, but it was worth the wait. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.